Welcome to Questions We're Afraid to Ask.
I don't have a good question. I mean, I have a million questions, but not one.
That's the question. When did people really show up in the Americas, right? Was it the land bridge? Was it the first land bridge? Was it the second one? Did we get here by boat? What do we know?
Well, yeah, I mean, that, if there is a question that is like the hot button question that is most problematic in archaeology in the Americas, that is it. I mean, and on one side, it's one might think on the negative side of things, for somebody like me, that's exciting, because that's the exploratory component, that's the analytical work, that's the discovery, that's where you develop ideas and methods and go test locations and sites. Right, and specific landscape, you investigate specific landscapes that might tell you or give you the evidence that will give you those kinds of answers. And so, if we want to get into the nitty gritty of like what current thinking is, I think really you're really kind of on it, because there isn't one single clear answer that we have. And we're of the generation where we all kind of grew up with that overriding theory of the Beringian landmass and a land bridge and these kinds of ideas and a populating event happening around 12,000 years ago. But most people outside of academia don't know that from the beginning of this, creating of the theory and so on. There's always been sites here and there that were outliers that didn't quite fit. And on the other hand, a lot of the questions that we asked, that answered a lot of them pretty well. It answered a lot of things. But, there's always been a site here or there that has kind of pushed the thinking, or you could say kind of been a thorn, a thorn in the side of this theory. But I like this comment that you said earlier that, it's not just about, having one thing that's older than Clovis and suddenly you have everything to say about it. You really need to establish patterns across the landscape. You need to have really great sites that have hopefully robust data, but also data that has really irrefutable context. So in our world, when we investigate a site, we talk about things like, soil integrity, depositional integrity, and that just means that the context which encapsulate those cultural materials, it's not churned up and mixed up. You don't have young stuff mixed with the old stuff, and you don't have the old stuff mixed with the young stuff. So you have good horizonation, as you go through these soil layers and you go through these cultural layers. And so if you have a great site like Galt, what you have is a large site, a very prolific site in the amount of material, but you have that horizonation that is really, really, testable. It's abundant. It's clear. But at the same time, like any good investigative group, you have to do multiple lines of testing so that it's not just one thing that's telling you the answer. It's not just the types of tools associated with the time that's going to tell you it's super old. You need to include radiocarbon dating. You need to include stuff like optically spun luminescence dating, things that like really give you absolute time signatures, not relative time signatures. So and there's multiple things. There's the soils part of it where you can basically understand the depositional history of the site and so on. There's so many things. So in the end, you have to have a multidisciplinary team of dozens of people, really, that's checking everybody to make sure it's airtight. And then and that's in something like Galt, that's one site. That's not like a pattern. That doesn't set a pattern from South and North America. You have one site that gives you such abundant prehistoric material that is below the Clovis horizon. And on top of that, you have a discrete depositional layer that separates Clovis and that older cultural
Is that
component
the matte black?
that is basically sterile. So you have you have a little.
Okay.
No, it's not. It's not a black mat. It's but pump the brakes on that topic. But on the other hand, it is a soil layer that is about 8 centimeters thick that represents about 2,500 years of development, right? So you have Clovis. We dug through the Clovis, and you hit basically a zone of soil development that happened for about 2,500 years, and there's virtually no cultural stuff in it. We dug through that, and we hit a whole new cultural component that's a mixture of many different hunter-gatherer groups that have different systems and styles of working stone tools. They're not the same groups. There's multiples, and that cultural component starts at 16,000, and we dug all the way to bedrock. Okay, and we have maximum ages at about 21,000. Now those are, you have to also keep in mind that those have like a plus minus range on those absolute dates. So when you hear somebody say 18,000 years ago at Galt, what they are giving you, or what you are reading, is basically sort of like that median, minus. that range in the middle. Yeah. So you have 16, and then and so it starts at 16,000 years ago, but it's a really virtually 4,000 years of prehistory. And so what I tend to tell people is that we have, I think, solidly a maximum range near 20,000, and then but the ceiling to that older component is at about that younger ceiling is at about 16,000. So between 16 and 20 marks that period of time that's well older than Clovis that we have at the Gault site, and those two layers are not mixing with each other.
Absolutely.
What do
and that's
think,
important.
Was this like a gathering? There's so you said there's so much stuff. I think there's the site's at 150,000 itums that y'all have found in the. Was this a gathering site? Was this a town? Like, I mean, do you have any idea why there's so much stuff in one spot?
Is it just one of those areas where it's just so perfect with the water and the grass and the food and everything that people just naturally gathered there as like an early trading type post? I know a lot of it's super theoretical because we don't have a lot of the cultural anthropology type stuff, because it's just, you're down to stone. Like we don't have a lot of wood or structure or anything like that we can speculate on.
True. Yeah, that's very true. We don't have like the blankets and shoes and all of these the perishables, and we,
because I can tell you I've looked on the internet to try and find stuff, and there's not a ton of stuff that I've been able to find. So that's cool.
Yeah, and well, we published the dates of this material in the Science Advances in 2018, but the big book on the material won't be released until probably late
Wow.
2024 or early 2025, and that's a 400-page volume, and that's a very, very, very technical, scientific, robust book. And but by getting back to sort of something to say about the qualities of the location and that relationship to the people, like what can we say about that? Because it's all about people and place. And one of the biggest, most common questions I get is,
Not
well,
there.
Sergio, why here and not, a mile down the road? And well, the basic question,
Absolutely.
especially when you're on site, and I look forward to you guys coming to the site as soon as you can, especially like in the spring when it's just super beautiful. But you actually hit the nail on the head on a couple of those traits, and that is, in one small location, you're able, if you're a hunter-gatherer where you're so connected and dependent on the ecology, you are in a location where you can leverage two ecological environments in one spot. So one easy way to explain that is when you walk into the site and you start walking towards the valley, you start looking into, from a distance, you can see how the landscape is kind of, it has bluffs, it's incised by a spring. And so on your right side, you have this limestone bedrock, very shallow soils, surface over here. And then to your left, you have a deep valley that gives you the deep soils. So your whole tree environment, the ecological environment, changes drastically when you go down into the valley and step off the bluff. So if you're a hunter-gatherer, a few feet this way, there is this environment, and a few feet that way, there's this environment. And you can leverage both just really, really, really quickly. And then on top of that, you have
which is huge, especially in like Texas.
You have fresh spring
there's
water.
so much distance potentially between water sources. Now, the Killeen-ish Florence area, thankfully we've got quite a few rivers through here. I mean, it's not the same now that we've dammed up all the rivers and everything. But if you look at the maps and stuff, where Texas has huge dry regions, where this is one of the wetter regions, at least in central Texas. We have a lot of tributaries and stuff leading into several of the rivers. Because I know there's a lot of really good spots in the area, not just the Galt site. But I've been all over this area, and my family has.
Oh, absolutely.
My
absolutely.
dad's family is from this part of the country. And I would talk to my grandfather and my great grandfather and stuff, and they would talk about walking through places, finding springs and that kind of stuff. And that's abundant here, but we go 20, 30 miles another way and we're out of that region. So there's stuff here. There's the water sources where you don't, as we go a little further west, you don't have those as prevalent.
Yeah. And there's one other important point that I really should make, and it's not only that the qualities of the site are ideal, but the underlying formation underneath the soil at the site, and the landscape, the way it's shaped, was actually ideal so that this material was preserved. So, as you know, in these areas in the hill country, a lot of these places in one flood could get scoured away, right? But the way the landscape is shaped there, we are fortunate as investigators at this current time that we have these 20,000-year-old deposits that were not washed away, not scoured away, and then even more so, they were not destroyed entirely by almost a century of collecting and looting, and so on. And it's everybody likes cool stuff. I'm not going to like jump on people's backs because they want to be happy and so on. But what happened greatly between the 70s and the 90s was a lot of modern large scale kind of plundering of the site. And on one side, we lost a lot of material relating to the Archaic period, which was like the first, the last 9,000 years. A lot of material related to the Archaic period was greatly kind of churned up and messed up. But in the early 90s, when Dr. Hester and Dr. Michael Collins went out there, what was obvious was the presence of an immense amount of Clovis material in these back piles from all the pitting and digging and stuff that was going on out there. And then two, Dr. Collins noticed that in some of these deep holes, he could see deeper cultural intervals that were older than the interval where Clovis was. So already from 30 years ago, he was already thinking of a very specific and important hypothesis or question, and that is, can I use a prolific Clovis site, one of the best Clovis sites in North America, can I use that to prove
when
older
you
than
say
Clovis?
Are you saying Clovis as in the date range, or are you saying Clovis as in the points were similar to the other points that were found and they were matching up that way? It does.
That's a great question, because the definitions of Clovis get all over the place. and I was trying to thread the needle in a way by sort of fusing those two, because a lot of people think of Clovis as a people, and I'm not one of these investigators that thinks in this perspective. My reference point is a little different. When I think of Clovis, I think of like lifeway patterns that are similar across space, and the importation of a suite of tools, right, that is common across space also, but I don't see them as the same people from subglacial Canada all the way down to Venezuela. I don't ascribe to that being all one people that also populated the Americas. All of this gets all kind of messy, and I think it needs a lot more refinement and improvement on a definitional level. So if I were to go down just one more step deeper on that, I would say that Clovis to me is really kind of like a technological package or a techno complex where you have the export and import of what, of that technological informational system, like in the oral transmission way, by example, by observation, and with that little lubricant between social groups. You got to have linguists in the middle that help that process from group to group. These really ancient hunter gatherers. There weren't any city states or anything at this time. These are hunter gatherers that are really, really mobile. They're specializing in big game and all of that kind of thing. So I think really with data like sites like Galt and others in the Americas, you're looking at a landscape that when Clovis happened as a cultural phenomenon, like this toolkit being adopted across space,
now that makes
people
sense.
were already here. So this is my perspective. Not all researchers agree with that, but I think everything that we understand today about how hunter-gatherers move and how how they move across the landscape, master those landscapes, and work seasonally and so on. A populating event, that hits the Northwest from from Asia and makes it all the way down into South America in just, a few centuries, from coast to coast, from the Carolinas to California, from Canada down to beyond Venezuela. It doesn't really fit well. On the other hand, if you have networks of groups that have been here a long time already, many generations and millennia, they've already been here, and then you have this, we don't know what it would be, but something powerful that causes people to adopt this new way of doing things. And it's almost like seeing themselves or trying to reinvent themselves also. It's like what we might call in anthropological theory or social theory, like a revitalization movement, something like this. And so this technological package is imported, and it really, really means something. Otherwise, why would you import it? You've always had knives and pointy things before. Why do you need to bring this in? So the point I'm getting at is that the adoption of ideas and the movement of, like, I got to have the iPhone too, moves faster than how hunter-gatherers move across the landscape.
One of the things that I like to look at whenever I'm thinking about how this stuff may have been adopted is Otzi, the Iceman. You're familiar with that find? To me, he's fascinating in so many ways. He's got one of my hobbies is like primitive hiking, bushcraft, survival stuff. And basically what he carries on him is basically the same stuff they still teach you to carry today. But when you look at him, he has, early metal tools, and he's still carrying stone arrowheads and stone knives and flints. So it's not like, well, I got metal, so I'm going to throw this other stuff away. There's this whole breadth of technology that because we think Bronze Age, we think, everything's bronze, right? And he had a bronze axe head, and then everything else. If you took that away, he would have been we would have said he was a Stone Age man, right? So it just goes to show that one thing's better, but they didn't necessarily get rid of the old thing, and so like the arrowhead has to be significantly better to adopt that new style of arrowhead and learning a new way of doing things. And because I've played with flint knapping, I've worked with it a little bit. I'm by no means good at it, but it's to change something when you figured out how to do something is not easy.
I will.
Well, I will definitely introduce you to my son because he has more time and is much more passionate about it than I am. I have too many hobbies, is what it boils down to. But I want to learn more. I've always been fascinated with it. I have Native American in my background, and this is the other thing that's fascinating to me about this is we don't really know a whole lot because of the way the family moved forward, and the natives were treated so poorly. So as soon as one of my ancestors could pass as white, we think they burned down the courthouse that had all the papers about who, the birth records. So then he could reinvent himself, so we don't, I know it's there, but I don't know enough about it. So the whole history of Native American culture is fascinating to me because I can't latch on to one. I don't have a tradition that I can connect with. And that brings me to a question. I know there's being as respectful as we can of Native peoples because we stole all their land and we did horrible things as a country to them. Does that impact the site at all? Is there anything that you have to look for as you're doing the digs? Is there any particular tribe that may lay claim to this area? I don't know how archaeology and Native American culture connect. I know just enough to know I don't know anything about it here in the Americas, other than there can be challenges there. Is that something that y'all have run into?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's it's an important question, and the importance of that question is only getting stronger every day these days. And I've been in the director position at the site virtually for only a year now, even though I've been with the project for over a decade. But one of the really central things that I want to try to develop over time are those relationships. And recently, it was about 2 months ago, I had there was some visiting tribal elders that came to the site. And really, for me, it wasn't really so much about, oh, let me just explain archaeology, till the stars go down. It was more about sharing the space together and creating the connection, between us, and fostering an environment where there's an easy flow of experience and information, respect, and so on. Because on one hand, some people today do have genetic signatures that can be traced to these really, really ancient times, and to populating events or migration events as old as Clovis, and so on. On the other hand, talking about the peopling of the Americas is a shared human story for all of us, right? So my goal is to make it as inclusive as possible, where we find some ground where the cultural side, the science side, the respect and honoring of the tribes and so on, all of this. I don't know if there's a perfect way to do that, but from I guess my altruistic intent, that's the best place I can start with. And so but I think another part of your question is pointing at what happens if
that's kind of where I was heading, is
buried remains.
Do the breaks suddenly stop if you find ancient human remains? And then I know there's a very sensitive issue with tribes where they're like, well, that's ours, and that's our tribe. We've always been here. Even if we move, we're moving past layers where there's no evidence of human occupation in any way, shape, or form for, like you said, like 2,500 years. While I want to respect the tribe's origin stories and traditions, we know peoples come in, peoples get wiped out, new peoples come in. If the land looks like that's a good place for me to survive and thrive, I'm going to move in there. We also know that, warfare happens, tribes get pushed out. This was all happening before, the Americas were, taken over and taken away from the Native Americans, and all that history happened. So I'm not, I don't know how you handle something like that. I don't know what the laws are behind that.
Yeah, well, it's yeah, it's pretty like bold print, simple, for us.
Okay.
There's state and federal laws for these kinds of things, and so if we were to run into human remains, yes, it would be immediately a situation where you have to bring the tribal people into the picture. So things that relate to burials and things like that. Yes, we try to we really
absolutely
want to improve.
No, I get that 100%.
On previous practices,
which is part of why I'm asking the question, because I just I know that stuff has happened, and there's a lot of trust to be rebuilt in this. Which, if you don't mind my asking, which tribe falls in this area? Do we know what's like? Do we know what was considered this? Yeah, do we know which tribe would have been in this Central Killeen, Florence area? Because I've heard lots of different ones over the years, and I don't know which one is officially for this area.
Well, an official thing, I think, for me, is certainly going to be hard. It's not, I'm more of a prehistorian and deep time kind of investigator, but as far as like a single tribe, I think it's probably better to think and kind of understand that even in recent times, the last few hundred years, you're really
that's
what
what
be
I figured the
truthfully in
answer
the
was going to
discussion
be,
would be
because
multiple.
the history that I know is this
multiple,
was a range where
yeah.
several tribes ranged in and out, and it wasn't like a permanent territory. And then there's the names of all the famous fights and stuff. We don't even know if that's exactly who was there when some of this stuff was happening. So I didn't mean to kind of derail us, but the Native American aspect is just fascinating to me because, and you talk about genetic markers and stuff. That's something else that we've talked about in some of our other shows. I did one of the DNA tests not long ago, and I came back with like a high percentage of Neanderthal. So it's fascinating to see how all these things tie in and how much we're learning about what we didn't know just through that too.
Did you come up with near 3%?
Ish.
Yeah,
It's high. I was in like the 95th percentile of the people that they were finding. And the irony is my dad was originally diagnosed as that. I say diagnosed. His doctor said that he thought he was Neanderthal back in the late 90s because of the way like his shoulders and his knees were built. It was a slightly different structure. Back before we thought that was a real thing, his orthopedic surgeon was like, yeah, I think this is like, you don't look like you're built right. And these things are different. And you've got some Neanderthal in you. And we were like, oh yeah, funny. Come to find out he's right.
That's true. All right, I have a quick question here. You mentioned the 8-centimeter section that was really clearly defined, and I did you say the word sterile, or did I miss? Okay.
Yes, I did. And if I were to be absolutely scientific, I would say that it was almost entirely sterile. Sterile. There were in that layer across the excavation block, there were a few flakes of chert in there.
So does that mean that there was just
anything
like
else?
nothing
It was
growing
like really
at that time, or like I don't know what sterile exactly like completely means in that way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so what I meant in that context of what I was saying at that time was lacking cultural material. Not a sterile soil that is sort of like absent
it wasn't
of like
dead.
That's what I was clarifying on. Okay. All right. So you said something earlier, and we totally glossed over it, and we have to come back. You said you have art, and I have.
Yes.
I want to hear about what kind of art, like.
Yeah. So basically, we have these artifacts that we call incised stones or engraved stones, and basically what they would do is take a cobble of a flat piece of limestone, or even, and many times they will take a nodule of chert that chert's going to have a mineral layer around it, that we call cortex. And if you take another chert flake, which is very sharp,
it's like a razor blade,
like a surgical, scalpel, what we are finding are dozens and dozens of these stones where they've carved emblematic, designs on these stones.
Yeah.
We don't know what they mean, but we have them as old as that deepest layer, and we have them continuously into the early archaic
lines and that kind of stuff we've seen in like cave walls, and is it that kind of stuff, or like what kind of,
or does it look runic or symbolic, or they're repeating patterns?
Yeah. So the most common repeating pattern are these like double parallel lines and cross-hatched lines, but we do have some that deviate from that, and they seem to represent some sort of like something, but we don't know what the something is. Is it like grass in a field? Is it something else? We don't know, but it looks like
it's a symbol.
It looks like it represents something.
go ahead, Daniel.
You're not seeing like forms like animals or people. It's still geometric and patterns. Okay.
Yes, but a couple that have deviated are a little less geometric, and and actually we have a monument by the road at the Galt site that has this, one of our famous incised stones, like that shape and that design is on the monument, and we don't know what it is, but it's not very geometric. A lot of our friends and colleagues call it the wheat stone because it almost looks like, wheat in a field, kind of thing. But that's just something that took hold. There's no really interpretive power in that. A lot of it is geometric, and that's the very common, I would say, theme. A lot of cross-hatch lines, a lot of double parallel lines, and so on. And this is also very common to ancient peoples, and even our human ancestors were doing this. It's such a very, very old pattern of behavior.
And
that's just
one last
seems
thing on
to be quite common.
One more, Bill, and then I'll let you go. Were these like big stones, like stuff that they were like doing and leaving, or did this seem more like little things that maybe they were carrying around, or?
Yeah, so a lot of these are small, handheld. So they will be a large one would be like this. Some of them are very small. We also have broken pieces of some, of course. But they tend to be small. So we're not finding like big, massive stones with this stuff on it. At least not yet. If I find that someday,
please
I will call
do.
you guys immediately. But
because we're always one farmer away from digging into something and finding the next Gobliateke, or like seriously, it's like we don't know this stuff's here until we find it's here. I forgot exactly what I was going to ask.
Then I'm going to ask the question real quick. How did this site get found?
Okay, yeah, that is a long story, but I would say the basic thread goes something like this. When the first, I think the first Western ownership of the land, when that was purchased in the early 1900s, that was the family, the Galt family. So that's where the Galt name comes from. So that's like around 1907 or 8 or something like that. And then from those earliest times, I mean, it was obvious to the Galt family and some of the visitors that it was an extraordinary place because artifacts were on the surface everywhere. So by the time the first professional anthropologist, archaeologist arrived, which was in 1929, it was already known. Like it was already known, and so when he arrived, he and if you were to like read some of his like handwritten notes, it certainly looked a little different then than now because now when you go there, you're seeing the landscape after all of that collecting and looting and also farming and so on. So a lot of the surface has been like sort of deflated and flattened out. But when J.E. Pierce from the University of Texas went out there in 1929, what he saw in the main field was this big, like he called it like about a 6-foot rise, like a swollen landscape, like there was a bulge in the landscape, which basically was the result of the land being full of ancient refuse from people. It's loaded with artifacts, loaded with ancient encampments, and it's a midden. It's a large midden site, one of the largest in the state. And so, I mean, actually, in his notes, he called it like a kitchen midden, which basically just kind of means, a place where there's large scale processing of foods and a lot of habitation in a large open site like that, and so on. So, after 1929, 1930, there's a change in ownership a couple of times. And across the decades, there was a lot of pay-to-dig operations going on. And I've met many, good old boys, that were out there during the 80s and 90s and so on, and told me many stories about some of the most extraordinary things leaving the site. But what happened was, and I'll try to sum this up. What really happened was in the early 90s, this would be in 1991, this is when Dr. Michael Collins came out there with Dr. Thomas Hester and so on. And that was really that really got the ball moving because on one hand, they saw so much damage to the site, but Dr. Collins recognized wow, the importance of this site is extraordinary. And it still holds potential for science. That was the key thing. It's even through all of that plundering over decades, it still holds potential for science. So over the years throughout the 90s, he did some testing on site in different locations, big excavations and testing, but the final big excavation block that happened started in 2007 out in that big main field. And that excavation area is called Area 15. And that was really where we kind of hit the bullseye and were able to really move the paradigm a little bit. And that's where I would say, Dr. Collins really got it right, where we needed to do the major excavation. He got the location right. And now we're just really trying to get the word out to the kids and the public and the scientific community.
How much more is there to get out of Area 15, do you think? How much more work is there to do?
Okay. Well, we completed Area 15, but I think what your question is what I think you're asking also is how much more?
Yeah, that was going to be what do y'all see moving forward was going to be my question.
Right. So, and keep in mind, we have several million.
You still have to catalog and go through.
We have to be we have to be responsible too in terms of curation and also analysis, reporting, and because this first book that we're going to put out within a year or so is going to be totally focused on Clovis and older than Clovis material. So that leaves virtually another 12,800 years of time to report on. So that's a lot of material. On the other hand, one thing that is really important for people to understand is that the Galt site is really an investigation that in the totality of that Buttermilk Creek area is really kind of like a pinprick. So that Buttermilk Creek Valley is it's an extraordinary place. And so occupations and encampments are all along Buttermilk Creek, really for miles. So now I can't, because I haven't investigated those areas, I can't say the quality, of those sites. I can't make those kind of assessments. But in my visitations to some of the ranches in the area along Buttermilk Creek, there's definitely lots of potential for further investigations for lateral sampling along that creek that might give us even more explanation for these oldest hunter-gatherers in Texas. but also on this topic of special sites and so on, also to help the landowners kind of get into the mindset of like protecting those ancient stories by not, damaging the land too much, yeah, there's a lot of promise for the future, but we're also needing to be responsible and address what we've already dug, and excavated.
So if someone was going to find something on Buttermilk Creek that somewhere else, like what would be the one thing that you would want someone to find that would be the best, like that would unlock something for you?
Yeah, what flags would people look for? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think probably the two big flags for me would be finding another area where the soil integrity is very good. In other words, it's undamaged. And two, that you find that Clovis interval.
You want to see that solid gap in between the two again.
I want to see that Clovis interval, and I'd really like to see that older than Clovis interval also, but somewhere else down that big valley. Now, the other important part is that to find related things to what we've found, but also some things that we don't have yet from those oldest components. And that is, I would really like to find maybe some extinct megafauna bones. And, even if I had a surviving, which is unlikely in those soils, but if we had a means to get genetic data, human genetic data, that would change everything. We just don't have in North America, South America, in the Americas, human remains that we can get genetic information on. It doesn't exist.
I was going to say, is that something that we can even legally test, or do we need the tribe's permission to do that if you find something like that?
Yeah, of course. We immediately, if something like that were to be found, like a piece of a shin bone or something, no matter what it is. Those discussions and those communications would absolutely happen.
So we can't just get it, find it, test it. We have to go through the process first, is my understanding.
Yeah, and there's also there's the context too, because if it's when you find a bone like that, there's a very good chance that there might be more. You might be dealing with the burial, and so it brings in a whole other level of inclusiveness that you got to have.
My brother's a police officer, and he often tells me that if someone finds buried remains, at some point it's criminal, and at some point it's archaeology, and you don't necessarily know where that is, right? Because he's had to deal with weird stuff like that before.
So in our case, we would have to send, when it really kind of hits that threshold, we have to send letters to the tribal groups and explain, if they want to allow science to happen, or do they want to claim, the remains of we have very clear protocols for those things. So everybody's kind of like respected.
How did the confirmation of the dates at White Sands make y'all feel? Was that nice to have another group go, hey, we've got some evidence over here too? So
yeah, sure. I mean, of course, that project is still ongoing, and I think they recently released more technical data that I think is helping their argument quite a bit, and also it's in that date range that is close to Galt, and it's also it matches well with some of the other sites that are older than Clovis and other places in the Americas, and not only in North America, but in Mexico and South America and so on. So, and also the type of evidence is so different, where you have footprints and so it's I think it's really great. I look forward to them reporting more. I think I've heard they might have even more evidence than they've published so far, but what they published is I think it holds a lot of merit, and I'm glad they're trying to shore up and get more robust procedures in their dating. I think they're doing everything they can, and I really applaud those efforts on that.
Have you found any wooden artifacts, or is it all stone tools at this point, or was there any kind of like pottery potentially that y'all have found?
Well, strangely at Galt, or maybe not so strangely. I mean, I'm sure some of that stuff
has been stolen,
taken, and it's probably in somebody's Tupperware container somewhere. But we do have a little bit of ceramics, but of course that is very, very.
I was going to say, are those
is
that Clovis time frame ceramics, or is that okay?
No. This is like very We don't have anything like that we basically, you don't really find much of ceramics in sites in Texas until very recent times. You're really dealing with like the last, couple thousand years that you really start to see that. But as far as like when you get into Middle and early Archaic and Paleo-Indian timeframes, what we are encountering, of course, most of the time is just unbelievable amounts of manufacturing of stone tools. And, what is interesting about Galt is that, I mean, it's basically kind of a workshop place. It's a manufacturing place, but it's a manufacturing place that also has the qualities of like in the landscape that you can host, I would say, a good number of people. So I think a place like Galt could be one of these significant places with the water, the food, and you're also near the Balcones Escarpment. You're not too far from some nice rivers and so on. It's kind of like it's very easy in my mind to think of it as like a cultural landmark that everybody's known for generations, and it probably was it's the kind of place that when people came there, they were doing everything. It's not just like a kill site.
Yeah,
they weren't just like killing a buffalo and then they moved on. They were really doing all kinds of things there, and kids were learning things. They were learning how to make tools. It's a residential kind of place, short term, large scale, and then they move on. So so I kind of see it as that kind of site because it not only has the abundant resources, but it has unlimited amounts of some of the best chert you can find on the landscape.
What I'm hearing you describe is all right, this time of year we all get together here, and the tent city, for lack of a better way to describe it, goes up, and we're going to stay here, and we're going to do this stuff, and we're going to have the swap meets and the get-togethers and everything, and then as the seasons change, potentially you go away. But every year, because it's so perfect, the people are coming back to it potentially. That's kind of what I'm hearing, a possibility of you describing.
Yeah, and I think a site like that can host those things, where some different groups meet. Related groups can meet. They find new mates. You might even be having different kinds of gatherings and rituals and all kinds of practices and stone making on a large scale, right? And so there's a lot of abundant activity going on. It's like everything. It's like crawling with activity. I kind of see it that way. Now, I don't want to cause in people's minds like it's like a hornet's nest or like an ant mound of people all the way across time. I don't want to quite convey that. I just mean that it's when we're talking about Clovis time frames and so on, even though population sizes are very low across the North American landscape, I would say, this is probably an ideal place where you would do things like that. You would meet other groups and possibly do all those activities, do lots of manufacturing, and then those groups could disperse and so on. So periodically I can imagine those things happening in the midst of the more common, more frequent common hunter-gatherer group coming through. So periodic you have those big meetings, but then more frequent, that a group of this or that is going to come through and do
I'm
its
just
thing,
thinking, because I mentioned earlier a little bit about like the place my parents have, and little bits and pieces and things that have been found, never anything whole or anything like that, but like a busted arrowhead that didn't work or whatever. And our place is more, when you look at it, is more like a good place to spend a couple of nights and then go on, where you can get chert off the ground and their stuff. But it's not robust enough that you'd want a lot of people staying a long time. But it's a great place where it'd be like, all right, we're gonna put up here for a couple of days and see what's in the area, and then move on to the next thing, and then move on to the next good camp. It's a good campsite versus a good longer term type site, if that makes sense. I'm just trying to visualize some of the stuff in my head as you're describing it.
Yeah, and people tend to ask me questions, like, well, what were the populations here, and in my mind, I'm like, well, when, because everything just depends on, the time component and so on. And, when we're talking about hunter-gatherers, 20,000 years ago, I mean, you're really looking at a landscape in North America that is not going to be anything like what we can imagine now. Like the amount of nature and land in between people compared to now, it's hard for our mind to wrap our heads around that, because you could very easily not see many people that often for your whole life.
Yeah.
Right.
Compared to what we are used to, and you're always moving, and we are on our phones, and we are on our couches, and we're used to our homes, and we are not hunter gatherers. We're not used to always being on the move and reading everything in the sky and land and everything for our life way. We're just not. We're divorced from that now, pretty much,
So you mentioned earlier that you met with some of the people who had pulled stuff out earlier in the 80s and 90s, and they had told you about stuff that had come out. So what is the craziest thing that you haven't seen, but you were told?
We know you can't prove it's there. We get that. We're not going to say this is what's happening, but because I've heard good old boy stories in this area about weird finds and stuff that's been dug up, not necessarily on the Galt site, but just in this area. So I'm real curious to see.
Yeah. Well, I haven't really had any story of like a really weird thing. What has really shocked me was the amount of certain points and knives that even single individuals pulled from the site. I mean, I've heard of collections of single individuals that, would have 1,000 pieces or several thousand pieces of the same style type from a particular period. Now, we can think about, wow, okay, let's extrapolate and think about other individuals over decades that took stuff from the property too. But my mind is also thinking about, now what does that mean for those specific time periods when they're manufacturing this stuff? Because you really have to think of these workshops with the intensity of manufacturing that's going on, that they're going to leave behind, you know, so much
Thousands of
for us
points.
to
Yeah.
discover. Now we will, you know, we will of course find all the shattered chert debris, but to find many times, you know, so many hundreds or thousands of intact points that relate to, you know, living there and discard or losing something, or it's so abundant, and the abundance of the debris that we find is so much that we can kind of extrapolate just an enormous amount of manufacturing for certain time periods, you know, where we, for us, sometimes we're not even digging through soil. We're just digging straight through just flakes, you know. It's really intense manufacturing in some locations
Some of
on
those
site.
things are fascinating. My dad tells a story, and I was too young to remember, but his father had a lake house on one of the creeks that went into Lake Livingston in the Houston area, and they had a drought that came through, and he said they went in with 5-gallon buckets and just picked up thousands and thousands of spear points and arrowheads, and you know he's got several cigar boxes full of stuff still, but he's like, you know, we just took it and we gave it away to people because it was just everywhere. And you know, you're not digging; it's just it's wash out from years of washout, right? But the lake drop, and it's just everywhere. And I couldn't imagine something like that. But I've seen pieces, and you know, they're not perfect. A lot of them are broken, but a lot of them look broken like they hit an animal and broke, not like I broke it when, you know, like an arrowhead where the tips are breaking off or the little side pieces are breaking off. And so I know those kind of things happen. I've seen evidence that they actually do. So I can only imagine what some of these guys may have done with a backhoe, going in and just digging stuff up. I hope they didn't dynamite it. You know?
And they're digging. They're digging so fast that they often like leave things because they're just the rate at which they're moving soil can be so fast sometimes that they just miss stuff. But it's interesting that you mentioned Lake Livingston, because I've worked on some sites in that area, and some of the creeks around Lake Livingston, you know, they're you know, you have intact like terraces that relate to like these Pleistocene times, you know, so you have abundance of Clovis and many of the other Paleo-Indian point types, you know, like Dalton and what are these other, Golondrina and Plainview, and there's so many San Patrice, you know, there's so many points that I've seen in some of the sites I've worked with out there, and the landscape is just loaded. You know, you like you said, you know, if it's dry and some wind blows, you're probably going to see something on the ground, or if you have a rain event or the lake goes down, it's going to be there. And so, you know, it tells you a little bit about, you know, the presence of people everywhere on the landscape, and it's not because you know, everybody had a house everywhere. It's because the mobility of these people, you know, and or at least mobility is a strong component in that picture.
Well, and I would also expect that you would find more stuff in areas that are abundant for, you know, game and hunting, and you go to where the resources are, right? That's one of the things they teach us in the survival classes. You go where the resources are. That had to be even more true of, you know, people who are living off of them day to day. So, you know, I would expect to find way less out in the middle of the desert where there's nothing versus, the hill country where there's creeks and rivers and, grassland and stuff, right? We even look for it now. I mean, my family's hunted for years. You go and you look at the land and you look for, all right, where's the game going? Where's the stuff going? I mean, that's where I would expect to find more stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's somewhat true, and sometimes I'm also really surprised by how much you find in areas that aren't really the land of plenty. Like humans find a way. We're just we're so ingenuitive. We have an extraordinary capacity for abstraction and imagining and figuring things out, problem solving. It really just takes kind of like some need and focus, and it's amazing what you can like come up with.
I've got a question that's unrelated to the Galt site. I'm curious if you've seen it yet. There's a site that just popped up in the news not long ago in Zambia, talking about humans and our ancestors being so ingenious, where they went and looked back at some of the stuff they had found, and they redated some wooden joinery that's together in Zambia. And they've redated it now to 500,000 years old. So like pre-Homo sapiens, and it's primitive joinery, but it's definitive worked wood joinery together. Have you seen that? Did you see that pop up in the news? I'm curious what you think of something like that.
I think I saw maybe a week or two ago. I think I might have seen an abstract or a headline on that.
I chatted it to you, the BBC article in here.
Well, quite honestly, from somebody who looks at the archaeological record from the perspective of stoneworking, I'm not too surprised. Because I look at problem solving and I look at sort of like the cognitive operations, and as it's written in stone, and at these time frames, I wouldn't call what is going on in stone like super complex or anything. But having said that, there is some real strategy, and there's sort of like there are things in that abstract world of creativity and problem solving and developing strategies and stuff that even precedes 500,000 years ago. So, we are inheritors of like this specialization in a way. We aren't the inventors. We've inherited stuff that is so ancient, and so I'm not surprised. I really got to honestly look at what they've published in the peer review process, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and a lot of this is not like a new find. It's just they went back and re-examined with better, more modern dating technology, and that's how they redated it. But I personally don't think we give our ancestors enough credit, our pre-Homo sapien ancestors enough credit. And the big one, the thing that fascinated me about this is, one of the problems I've always had is the Hobbit, the Homo floresiensis that's come out, is on something they say has always been an island. It had to get there somehow. I don't think it swam hundreds or thousands of miles. So somebody made a boat and took the little Hobbit person there somehow. Either the Hobbits did it, we did it, or there was there's a giant missing gap. And Daniel and I come at this from, we're a species with amnesia, and we have ancestors with amnesia. We don't know the whole story. It feels like there's just a lot more there than what we grew up being taught, right? This is the way it was. And that's kind of the challenge we bring to anything. We don't want to be like, well, y'all don't know what you're talking about. We just feel like there's just so much more. There's just so much more to this story.
And every day there's a new thing.
That's for sure. It's kind of like, you're dealing with like a 5 million piece puzzle, but what you solidly know is maybe like, 600 in 50 pieces.
And we lost the box.
So and we haven't found a corner. Like. We haven't found an edge yet. We're kind of in the middle, and we think it's right.
But the situation with with these small ancestral forms that probably have some sort of evolutionary track that is rooted in Homo erectus or something like this. It could be some really super ancient branch that did do some watercraft work. They reach some of these land masses, and then they just you have a populating event, and then over massive spans of time, like most animals on islands or small land masses, they tend to get smaller in size. Just natural selection processes and so on. But yeah, those little guys were clearly manufacturing complex tools. They were hunting. They were bringing down big game, but yet they had brains not much bigger than a chimp. So there's so many fascinating bits of science out there that I just love it.
And we're rank amateurs that just hoover up whatever we can get anywhere. So I have one kind of oddball question for you, and because I don't remember the exact source. There was an early 80s, early 90s documentary I remember seeing, and I'm wondering if, and this is going more toward the academia side of things, and it was some weird thing Charlton Heston, I think, narrated, talking about giants or whatever. But that's not the point of my question. In all that, there was a woman who talked about doing research in Mexico, and she was a PhD student, or she was working toward that kind of stuff. And I'm going to try and find it, and I'll email you the stuff if I can find exactly where it was. But she found dates that kind of match what you're talking about. And basically, and this was in the late 70s, and got run out of academia because her stuff didn't match, and she decided to try and publish anyway. And she talks about how, it destroyed my career. How has academia, or because it feels like academia is now open to these ideas more so than they were before. Has there been something that shifted? Was there something that changed? Is it just the overwhelming amount of evidence now that people are publishing anyway? What has led people to be like, okay, well, we might be wrong, and let's look at new ideas?
Yeah, I think really, I think over the last decade, it's been a creeping erosion of the Clovis first model. That's just been eroding, and the force behind that erosion, I think, is I think on primarily probably on the side of the number of sites that we've found in the hemisphere that have enough merit that it's not that they all share some sort of common pattern, but they do show confirmed early presence, right? And so what is unique with a story and conclusions and data like Galt is that it's so abundant, it's so big, there's so much stuff, it's so well documented, and the science is good that all of those outliers over the years get a little bit more cred. They get a little bit more. They get a little bit more street cred, and scientific credibility. And so we're kind of at a time where you have things like white sands, you have things like Gault, you have sites such as Parsons Island on the East Coast, which I'm not sure those Parsons Island or not, but you also have Hartley Mammoth site in New Mexico. You have multiple in South America that are older than Clovis, but probably the biggest one in the 70s that also almost destroyed a career was the Monteverde site in Chile, which is at the bottom of South America. And there you had a site that undoubtedly had human occupation, human agency. You had a hearth feature. You could radiocarbon date the material, very deep deposits, and you had a conservative date of 33,000 years ago.
Wow. Sometimes I wonder if we didn't land in South America somehow and come up,
So, but the long story short was that, the professional community, slung its arrows and spears at the investigators, and there was a lot of accusations at the time because it just did not fit a really well accepted, answered most things theory of a populating event about 12,000 years ago. So it really got heated. It got really, really bad, and it's just taken decades for some people to loosen up, and it's also taken time for science to find more sites.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I figured there wasn't any one thing. It feels like it's a lot of stuff because Daniel and I also grew up with the dinosaurs died this way. Okay, now they've died a different way. Like we've watched several of these. It feels like in my lifetime I've watched several things we just knew how it was. Okay, now it's open to something else. Okay, now maybe it is something else. So it's an exciting time to be alive if you're interested in all of this.
And quite honestly, it's everything is we're so inundated with data and information. Some technical analysis over here might create a little bit different reference point or picture on something that had been investigated in multiple ways for many decades. And this little thing over here might say, well, maybe we should reevaluate. And so it kind of throws everything into this kind of spin. And in a ways, I think that's healthy. It's very, very, very healthy because we do need to reexamine the things all the time. We need to keep improving and correcting. I don't care if you're doing, subatomic particle physics. The answers in science are not absolute. They're always refining it. Like we might get a new particle that we find next week, or something that answers something about who knows what, dark energy or dark matter or gravity or quantum gravity or something. So even though we can get enough information to predict certain things on atomic level and build atomic bombs and all these other kinds of things, it doesn't mean we've mastered every bit of knowledge, So I like these things that help kind of force us to kind of reevaluate things, tighten, sharpen our pencils and make sure that we are on solid ground on things that we are putting out there. And then I think this is where I think sometimes in archaeology, there are some failings at times, and that's in that sometimes researchers will start to create identities out of the projects they are on and the ideas that they published. And when something is either refuting it or creating an alternate set of data and so on, it kind of sometimes it's about protecting an identity rather than let's get all the data on the table and let's follow the best data possible.
Yeah. I mean, we have this wonderful scientific method, and unfortunately, we have these human emotions and pride and stuff that comes into it, and there's the idea of like protecting a legacy. And I think we can do both, right? we can acknowledge all the good work, all the research that's been done, all the legacy that's there, but still include new data that you didn't have. It doesn't mean someone wouldn't have reached these conclusions if they didn't have all this stuff. But my background's more in like the humanities, and I saw a lot more of that kind of stuff, especially like theology, religion. There's a lot of, well, this is the way it was. We have new documents, like biblical studies and stuff. We know the way it is. Well, we found a whole bunch of new copies of the Bible book. And don't you think we should look at these? No, we shouldn't. We liked it, So there was a lot of that I dealt with in my background, like, which isn't the same, but it's not completely different either.
Well, it's a different topic, but it's similar behavior.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was getting at.
It's a similar behavior. It's like, no, I like this story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Instead of that story. Yeah. And it's like, that's, it's like, 4-5-year-olds in the sandbox.
Exactly.
No,
exactly.
I want this story.
I think what it is I like this story that I can hold on to versus I don't know we don't have a story. It's very open and this is scary. Yeah. And I like this thing. I can hold on to this thing and say, it's nice. I'm comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I try to, and I appreciate sort of like the idealism in your statements. I really like that, because that's really how I try to approach things. It's like everything is fresh and new and interesting and it's awesome. And, I was absolutely wrong on that. Let's go on,
Yeah.
And you got to have a sense of humor and, and just being open, and that openness is really a kind of a cornerstone of that scientific process, and you're not trying to shove, a story that you want out of the process.
So I've got kind of a question, and on that, and that there's always potential for more. The dating for y'all stopped, if I remember from what you said, right, at the Galt site because you hit bedrock, right? You couldn't dig anymore. So that doesn't necessarily mean that that's when things stopped. Stuff could have kept going, but you couldn't go any further down to find any more evidence there. So there's still a big open question mark as to, because for me, it's like if it's at least that old, we had to get here somehow, and that takes time too. So I like to do plus or minus on that, and then who knows? Maybe you dig in the valley somewhere else and you go down another 4 feet or 6 feet further before you hit bedrock, and you keep finding stuff.
There's it's a little sketchy, but the Cerruti mastodon out of California, they said it's like 130, and but still, like that's crazy, 130.
But what I mean there is y'all hit a physical layer that stopped you from potentially going further. Did I hear that right when you were talking about it?
Right. So, okay. Once we start digging into the rock, then we're getting in the territory of the paleontologists and dinosaurs. But you're bringing up a very, very important point that I try to tell people on every tour of the site, and that is that, where we stopped is just representing the last like soil and cultural horizon that survived.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. So if there's a potential area, is there a potential area along Buttermilk Creek that might have some remnant in the migration of that creek valley that maybe has a little bit older soil component and cultural component? It's possible, because certainly that creek valley had soils at some point in time older than 20,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. They're just not there anymore in the spot that we dug.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's important that we don't make an absolute sort of interpretation for the whole region, based on that excavation block that we did, which is why I said what we did is kind of a pinprick on the landscape, because we could very easily be in some other place in Texas that has more preservation
Mm-hmm.
of a deeper soil horizon and cultural horizon.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was thinking I went on a tour of a state park with my oldest son several years ago in that out near San Antonio, in that region where a lot of German immigrants came in the 1800s. And one of the things that struck me is they said that area, that stretch of farming area, had lost over 6 foot of topsoil because of the type of farming and stuff that had been used over the years. And I just imagine like the spot I was standing in being me taller and deeper, and there's been and I don't think a lot of people realize this in the way Texas was farmed in the 1800s. We've lost so much soil. There's so much washout that's just now gone, and everything that's gone with it in places that I've seen, like Livingston, and stuff, where I see so much stuff. We've potentially washed away so much of our history that we don't know. Now, granted, those people had to farm; they didn't know any other way to do it. But it just blows me away that anybody can stop and think we've figured it all out, right?
Yeah.
That's I'm like, no, there's got to be so much more to learn. We've been around for so long, because some of the time frame, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, but some of the time frames you're talking about, just the windows, it's like that's how long of recorded history we have, right? We're only talking like 5,000-6,000 years of recorded history that we know, and you're talking about like there's a 12,000 year history that you're not even dealing with in your book. That's like more than double potentially the recorded history that we have now, that you haven't even gone in and analyzed. It's just, those numbers blow me away. I'm just, the story is so old.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's our business, is telling these ancient stories, but we can't tell them if we don't have the context right.
Mm-hmm.
So, we can't just find a nice, beautiful, shiny knife. We have to have the context that surrounds it. So we can know what the climate was like at the time. We know what the diets were like at the time, so that we understand what the river valley was like at that time. We gotta set the scene, for those people that made the knife. And so when we like you're saying, when we lose sites by the week or by the day, we lose our chances of being able to get more precision to telling those ancient stories.
Have you all compared any of your data or dates with the Mammoth site in Waco? Are you familiar with the Mammoth site in Waco? It's not archaeology; it's more paleontology. But
yeah, that stuff is much older.
Okay.
And it's not related to human. That particular site is not related to human activity.
Yeah, it's just another like confluence of fascinating sites, because there's so much in one spot. And again, it's Texas, and a lot of people don't realize there's washouts here, and like stuff comes and floods and buries you, and you die, and you're all of a sudden you're under 5 feet of dirt that wasn't there an hour ago. So I know it. How could you all, or do you all have a way to test for like those kind of events? I don't understand the soil. I'm not a geologist. I don't understand the soil stuff. But when you look at the strata, is there a way for you to look for like massive, like flood type act of God events that may have moved a lot of stuff in? Is that part of how you figure out the layering? Or how does that work? I'm sorry to sound so ignorant on this. I just so outside my wheelhouse.
It's a very, very important contextual question, because anytime you're working a significant site, really almost any site, you really want to have you want it bracketed and understood in terms of land formation. How did it form? And in the context that you're painting, which is in an alluvial setting where you have a stream or river, or you have some sort of creek and so on, you can have such massive change in one weekend. So what can happen across 10,000 years? That's right. You can have a stripping out of an area say a flood 9,000 years ago, right? And then you have soil development again, right? And then encampments and so on. But beyond that flooding event, you don't have any history there, because it was all flooded away. It was all washed away. And then you can also have the situation where you have everything like washed away, and then in, like what you said, in one event, you can have 8 feet of soil deposited that weekend, right? And I've been on sites where, the cultural artifact at the bottom of the event almost matches what's near the surface. And it's sort of like you can be looking at this very, very thick soil profile, and your first blush response is to think, wow, that must have took a long time to develop. It didn't take much time at all, so basically what I'm saying is, like, anytime we work on a site, we do have specialists that that is their background, that is their training and academic background to do what's called the geoarchaeology of the site. And so the land formation processes, what are the processes that make up that stream valley, that influence the archaeological context that you are investigating. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier how many things you pulled out, that there's like 500,000 items that they have to. So I assume you have to go through and catalog this stuff. So what are you guys looking for from, volunteers to come in and help do that? Like what are
your needs? Like? Yeah. What are y'all's needs?
Yeah, so it's a big process. So once things leave the field, like once we've excavated things and they're put in bags and so on, the amount of time that is put into those artifacts in the lab is like quadruple the time, that you put into the field. So, it takes, and from the beginning of this project, the Galt project, it was kind of hardwired in that there was no way like we could have a big enough paid staff to like take care of everything. It's just too massive. So, when you partner with, undergrad students, graduate students, and so on, then you're able to kind of pull in talent where they can get hands-on experience in the field, in the lab, understand the life cycle of like the artifact process from excavation all the way to the curation process, where it goes to a state certified institution, but in the middle, they're learning how to do analysis. They're learning how to go out into the field, learn field methods, learn how to read the landscape, from an archaeologist perspective, and recognize sites that a normal person's just not going to recognize being there or not. So and also just volunteers, people in the public that just think this stuff is cool and want to be involved, and the bottom line is, I think it would be astonishing for people to know the numbers of volunteers we've had help us over the years. I kid you not, we've probably had thousands of students and volunteers over the last 20 years helping on this project, and we honestly just can't thank these kinds of enthusiasts and young scholars and so on that have been a part of the process, and some of them go on to get advanced degrees because they get turned on to the work and like, wow, I never thought of stone tools that way, and then they want to become like PhDs in this kind of thing. So we've probably just in the last, decade, caused, probably 15 or 20 masters and PhDs, to come out of the Gault umbrella.
That's awesome. That's
you know,
amazing.
And that's the legacy of working under somebody really, really cool and inspiring and scientifically solid like Dr. Michael B. Collins.
We could keep you for hours.
I know. We're gonna have to do this.
This is
again.
amazing.
This is
we would love to have you back on as often as you can come.
Yes.
We hit the tip of the iceberg, and we'll continue on later sometime.
Absolutely.
We also want to be respectful of your time, so we don't want to keep you all night. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is kind of one of the interviews we've been dreaming about doing, something like this, and for it to be so close. I mean, I've been interested in this stuff, but it's right here, and it's paradigm shifting, and it's right here. That those coming together, it's just it struck a chord, And like I said, I have family in and from the area, and we know that it was from some tribe that lived in and around here, but who knows, because the tribes got moved all around. We don't really know anything. So it's just so fascinating to have the potential for a cultural heritage that
and
can be all of ours.
And well, that's where I'm trying to take things going forward, because so much of the fundamental work that's kind of created the legacy and the great story about Galt is established. So what's the future? And I think the future really is about getting this information into the classrooms, getting people like you guys, bright, interested, curious what's in our backyards, to the site, and see what it's all about, and kind of spread the word because most people don't know it's there. And and so
we're definitely gonna send you emails about how can we come see the site.
And also we have some special events. We're going to have a party on site pretty soon. And I want you guys to come out if you can.
Absolutely. Yeah, just let us know.
And we'll just continue this conversation as things develop.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of our pipe dream theories, I don't know if this is going to be possible, is basically like to tour the site while wearing a GoPro and kind of build a virtual tour for people who won't ever be able to come, and kind of like do it as like a big YouTube thing where we can publish and be like, hey, this is we toured the Galt site. And then you just watch, kind of go and watch the tour, and one of us films it with a camera, and one of us just kind of like the body cam thing, and just kind of.
And that's a cool idea.
We want to get it out there. That's this thing.
Yeah.
Most people they don't know about it.
We found out it was here, and we were like, wait a minute, this has been here for like 20 years, and it's like right there.
Right
like,
there.
How did I not know this was here? So,
and it's funny. I talked about it. My dad's like, oh yeah, I remember when they did that thing. I was like, you did.
You just
I know I
failed to mention it ever. Thanks for
that.
Y'all probably you two probably could have dug there if you knew about it.
Yes.
No.
Probably.
He would have. My dad might be one of those good old boys.
Well,
very well be. If he wasn't, my grandparent or my great grandfather who lived here probably was.
Yeah.
And that's the sad thing. It's like I wish I could get. The stories he had to some of y'all, because he was cowboy. He was one of the old cowboys, and he was in this area. Anyway, there's just so much history there that I don't want it lost anymore. That's the thing. I don't want the history lost.
Well, I share that, but you probably could have. Volunteered and worked with Dr. Collins if you would have known about it.
Yeah, I mean, I went to school in Seguin. It's like it wasn't that far away.
Yeah.
I was up here every other weekend in the 90s. I graduated in 2000. I could have been there right in that that peak. But no, it didn't tell me what was going on.
But we can do our thing now. We can do
yes,
our
we can.
Absolutely.
We can.